and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. Thank you for watching your top think tanks review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Today on the show, we're going to look at 5 of the top 50 United States think tanks, and we'll look at the top stories from each one of their websites. Now, first, we begin the show with the Brookings Institution. As we know, China has become a global economic power, so the US and the EU must have a coordinated strategy. At the time of Beijing's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001, China, though already growing rapidly, was in global terms an economic actor of limited consequence. A decade and a half later, China's transformation is without parallel in economic history. Over the past 15 years, China has experienced an 8-fold increase in GDP, enabling it to serve as the primary engine of global economic growth in the early 21st century. It has leapfrogged from 6th to 2nd place among the world's economies, trailing only the United States in absolute economic size. In addition, China has become the world's leading trading state and is now the 2nd largest source of outward foreign direct investment. Now, change of this magnitude has enhanced China's political power and economic leverage. It has also stimulated China's internal economic evolution, simultaneously expanding the power of state-owned enterprises while also contributing to major growth in the private sector. Now, China has also begun to think bigger, devoting increased attention to the rules of global economic governance. Although Beijing insists it has no intention of supplanting the existing international order, China contends that changing power realities will require modification of global rules. Now, China's heightened ambitions are occurring amidst a wrenching transition in the Chinese economy. At earlier stages of the country's economic reforms, China's lower labor costs conferred ample advantage to Chinese producers of consumer goods. As economic growth has slowed, Chinese policymakers increasingly call for innovation and new product development to facilitate advancement to higher levels of development. Now, these goals presume greatly increased investment and technology acquisition in the world's more advanced economies. But slowing Chinese growth threatens to limit investment opportunities within China for the EU and the United States. China's economic practices and priorities thus pose the issue of compatibility with the policy expectations of the advanced industrial economies. Reconciling these expectations have therefore become defining issues in both Europe and the United States. So Europe and the United States need to work together to figure out what to reconcile these expectations of the Chinese economy as they are going to enter this global economic stage, but they don't want to slow the Chinese economy down because then it hurts the investment for the EU and the United States. So again, we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place of this, what is the better choice to do? So we'll keep an eye on China like always, and we'll have some updates on later shows if there's any as soon as they come up. But next, the Rand Corporation explains why the next US president will inherit a troubled relationship with Russia, but one that over a quarter century has brought much benefit despite severe challenges. Now, America has not sought to isolate or weaken Russia, but opposes its aggression, as in Ukraine, and humanitarian threats, as in Syria. US engagement has helped Russia build a stronger economy and be more open to the world. The Kremlin's current anti-Western stridency coincides with the rising internal repression, which may limit what the next US president can do to improve relations. Puzzlingly, Russian state media is now spewing war scare rhetoric. Some observers say this presages renewed aggression in Ukraine. Others say that the aim is to deter America from challenging Russia in Syria. It may also reflect leadership worry about popular unrest, implied also by the recent shift to direct Kremlin control of a 400,000 armed force. In any event, policy toward America will remain forceful and at times be harsh or unpredictable. Now, despite these anxieties, stabilizing elements remain in US-Russian relations. None are more important than economic and scientific cooperation. For 25 years, Washington has encouraged sounder economic management with a greater role for private enterprises. In macroeconomics, much has been realized. Russia's currency is stable, aided by a floating exchange rate. Budget deficits are modest and public debt is minimal. A flat tax reduces distortions. The USSR could not feed itself. This year, Russia is likely to be the world's largest wheat exporter. Yet prospects for future economic ties are cloudy. corruption and bureaucratic interference remain widespread. Now, in response to the intervention in eastern Ukraine, America has sanctioned Russian energy, financial, and defense industry activities. Foreign investment flows into Russia last year were only $6.7 billion, a 92% plunge from 2 years prior. Among the reasons besides sanctions are economic stagnation that set in even before oil prices fell in 2014 and higher political risks arising from Moscow's anti-Western posturing. Now, the next president's biggest challenge involving Russia is eastern Ukraine, where 10,000 people have died and over 1 million are displaced. Europe and America are unified in opposing Russia's assault. The European-led Minsk peace process, on which little progress was made with Putin at a summit-level meeting on November 19th in Berlin, will fail if Russian proxies and forces keep shelling Ukraine. The next president should offer a greater U.S. role in the Minsk process to bring added leverage and provide advanced defensive arms to help Ukraine deter aggression. So, we've been looking a lot at the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, and although it's been very tense and Russia media is apparently spouting war scare rhetoric, there's been a lot of benefits to having this relationship with Russia, not just for the United States, but for Russia as well. An example they used in the article was that the USSR could not even feed itself, but this year Russia is likely to be the world's largest exporter of wheat. So, even though it's been kind of tense and kind of difficult to maintain this relationship, there's a reason why the United States has kept relations with Russia. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations has an update on the Mosul offensive. Iraqi special forces entered Mosul's eastern outskirts 2 weeks after the start of an offensive to retake the city from the self-proclaimed Islamic State. Now, the counterterrorism troops were met with small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades as they entered the city, which has been controlled by the Islamic State since June 2014 and is the group's last major stronghold in Iraq. Prime Minister al-Abadi called on the militants to surrender. An apparent U.S. airstrike on a nearby home killed a family of 8, including 3 children, according to relatives and Kurdish troops, raising concerns about risk to civilians trapped in the city. The deaths are intensifying concerns about risk to ordinary Iraqis now trapped in the city. Officials and aid agencies have been warning for months that the effort to dislodge ISIS from their last major stronghold in Iraq could have a high humanitarian cost, both for hundreds of thousands of civilians expected to flee the fighting and those unable to leave areas under the militants' control. ISIS already has added to its 2-year tally of atrocities in the region. Fighters have herded tens of thousands of civilians into Mosul to use as human shields. Now, tens of thousands of civilians who were unable to leave Mosul, ladies and gentlemen, are now being forced to stay and be used as human shields for ISIS as they try to hold Mosul. It is possible that ISIS will manage to regroup and repair its damaged brand, but a more likely scenario is that its supporters will defect to rival jihadist groups that are perceived as rising stars. In multi-party civil wars, fighters belonging to weak or fragmented groups will often switch sides to better organized rivals, and they are particularly inclined to defect when their group has deviated from its ideological commitments, as ISIS has done by failing to live up to its slogan, remaining and expanding. So, essentially, we're getting rid of ISIS, we're able to beat ISIS, but the members that we aren't able to get rid of or kill are just going to essentially defect to another terrorist group. So hopefully not a lot of that defecting happens and we can take care of a lot of these ISIS members. Now next, Human Rights Watch brings to our attention to Gulf governments trying to silence peaceful critics in response to a wave of online activism in recent years. The governments have responded to online criticism with surveillance, arrests, and other arbitrary punishments. In a nod to Twitter's 140-character limit, this interactive website presents the profiles of 140 prominent Bahraini, Kuwaiti, Omani, Qatari, Saudi, and Emirati social and political rights activists and descendants, and describes their struggles to resist government efforts to silence them. All 140 have faced government retaliation for exercising their right to freedom of expression, and many have been arrested, tried, and sentenced to fines or prison. Now, the Gulf states have engaged in a systematic and well-funded assault on free speech to subvert the potentially transformative impact of social media and internet technology, said Sarah Leah Whitson, Middle East Director for Human Rights Watch. Instead of hauling off their peaceful online critics to jail, Gulf governments should expand debate among members of society and carry out the much-needed reforms that many of these activists have demanded for years. Here is a video that shows you some of the information that is available on the interactive website. Now you can go onto this website and you can look at each 140 human rights activists or human rights defenders and see what they have done and the consequences they are facing or will be facing. Now, to end the show, the American Enterprise Institute asked the question, if Syria can cheat with chemical weapons, why not Iran on nukes? Every administration bends over backwards to defend its legacy, but the State Department today took that prerogative to a new and dangerous level. When questioned about the Syrian government's continued use of chemical weapons, despite Secretary of State John Kerry's deal for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to turn over such weaponry, a Deputy State Department spokesman insisted that Assad's continued use of weaponry he was supposed to hand over does not suggest the deal was unsuccessful. The deal that we worked out and successfully implemented with the Russians was declared chemical weapons, he said. The good faith effort to curtail Syrian chemical weapon use without resorting to military force, as per President Obama's original red line, has not worked. Now, rather than acknowledge this, Kerry and crew are doubling down on the notion that their diplomacy has worked since Assad's regime has not used any chemical weapons it had declared. It only used the chemical weapons which it had hidden. If Assad has not violated the deal he worked out with Russian mediation to curtail his chemical weapons use because he simply kept some material off the books, does that mean that the Obama administration will argue that Iranian cheating is not actually cheating if it occurred on aspects of its nuclear program on which it never came clean? Obama and Kerry might dismiss that notion, but it's an easy bet that the Iranian leadership will not. So in a sense, ladies and gentlemen, we made a deal with the government of Syria to not use chemical weapons. Syria continues to use chemical weapons, but we're saying, oh, it's okay because these were ones we didn't know about. Are you kidding me? It's okay because we didn't know about these weapons? No, that does not make it okay. And so what essentially this article is saying is the Iranian government might say, oh, well, we told you about these nuclear weapons, but we have these nuclear weapons hidden away, and since we told you we wouldn't use these, we'll use the ones that we hid, since, you know, it's okay for Syria to use hidden chemical weapons. That doesn't make sense to me, ladies and gentlemen. That's being too particular for an agreement for a matter that is way too serious. So ladies and gentlemen, you can find the link directly to these articles, all of these articles on the show today, below in the description. I encourage you to check all of them out. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter, whatever you want to do. But thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. That does it for your Top Think Tanks review. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.